because it is a myth that women are less sexual than men.
Yeah, 100%.
Let me repeat that.
Yeah.
It is a myth that women are less sexual than men, but a lot of times for the women is they're not having sex worth wanting.
Welcome to Games of Amore, where we explore romantic stories and the games we all play and love. I'm your host, Caesar, joined today by our guest host, Diana.
Hi, everybody.
And today we are speaking to the world-renowned sex therapist, Paola Andrea Rodriguez.
Yay!
Caesar, thank you so much for having me. Dee, so happy to be here. Thank you.
Our pleasure. So, Paola, you being a sex therapist, right, and with the tagline of the show, exploring the games we play and love, I'm sure you must have a strong opinion on that.
So many. But let me see if I can. I want to start, guys, that I think, there's just so much information out there. Men are this, women are this, narcissistic, gaslighting, stonewalling. So I want to start by the labels that we use that I think causes division between trying to understand one another. And I think when we think a little bit about games, I want to remind everybody that we are humans and all of us have experienced attachment injuries, traumas. I always like to think and tell people that our first relationships are our parents. And if there was some trauma or significant events that happen in that relationship, we're going to take that to our current relationship. So we talk about games, but there's just so much to dissect when we think, because it's easy to say, especially here in Miami, men just want to have sex, women just want someone with money. And we fall onto those assumptions, and to me, assumptions are dead ends.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting because I think that as you get older and you mature, you realize that, right? That those traumas, those relationships, those moments with your parents impact you in ways that it's even kind of surprising. At the end, you're like, wow, I didn't realize that that moment or that experience with my dad or my mom affected me. I think what's interesting about that is that sometimes people don't want to really accept that or come to terms with that, for that to be a factor when you make selections as to who you're going to be with and what relationships you develop. What would you recommend for a person to do to kind of self-reflect on that and say, I should dive more into that. I should accept that. Like, what's a good method for a person to start that journey to identify that more about some of those traumas they had as a child?
Yeah, Zena, and I think, it's such hard work, and I think this is where a lot of couples get stuck. But I think one of the most important things is when you feel activated or triggered by something that your partner did, see if you can pause and say, what is this bringing up for me? A lot of the times what we try to do is that we try to fix our partner because I'm going to put on you what I can't put into words myself. So I think to be able to pause and say, ooh, what is this reminding me of? Because now we get into the topic of, sometimes I see this in social media where it's like, if you don't go to a therapist, I'm not going to date you. And it's a very black and white way of thinking. I understand the intention. But we also have to be mindful that when people start coming to therapy, you are opening wounds that you haven't opened up in a very long time. Right? And it is hard work. So what I would say, see if you can pause and identify, not why didn't you wash the dishes? Why aren't you appreciating me? But what is it about my partner not appreciating me? What is that stirring up in me? That's a good start.
Right. Okay. And I think that it's interesting to pause because I'm right now, as you say that, I'm trying to self-reflect on how sometimes you might blow up in an argument, right? And then the person doesn't understand, and you may not even understand, why did I react so harshly to this? Why am I punishing my partner? And I think that that's so funny because it's like you're not even conscious that you're doing it, right? So like taking that pause and saying to yourself, what does this remind me of? or when do I remember this feeling happening before? I think it saves a lot of heartache with people.
Yeah, see, and even, right, like, because sometimes we are gonna get angry and we are going to react, right? We can punish ourselves for it and say, oh my God, why did I do that? I'm such a horrible person. No, no, no. What was that reaction really about? And now you're talking about another part of the relationship, because the reality is that a lot of the times we're blind to what we bring in, what this reaction was about, what is it that I'm feeling. But if there is enough trust between your partner and you, and your partner says, hey, babe, that really hurt me, or when you talk to me in that way, it makes me feel scared, right? And if there's enough trust, I can hear you out, right? And so I think that it's another beautiful part of relationships, that if I can trust you enough, I can look in the mirror and you can look back at me, and then I can take what you're saying as something that I'm going to explore within myself.
Right.
So, when you hear the words childhood trauma, most people think of something traumatic, right? Yet that's not always the case, right? Because maybe if you've never been sexually abused or physically abused, you think, oh, I don't have childhood trauma. But I find personally that the most insidious form of childhood trauma is emotional abuse. And I say insidious because you're not really aware of like little dynamics and patterns that you were exposed to that created you. Maybe you became a people pleaser, seeking to win approval unconsciously because that's how you were as a child. So, what would you say to people like that?
Yeah, so I would say, so to add to what you're saying, these are childhood trauma, but when you talked a little bit about emotional abuse and also emotional unavailability, right? It's really important to understand, am I seeking to heal my mom wound through the relationship with you, right? And when you talked about people pleaser, right? Because what we do with trauma, and let's define trauma, right? Because I think some people, I don't have that. All of us sitting here have had some type of trauma, right? Because the way that I like to define trauma is something that felt really overwhelming. The ingredient that we add to the overwhelming feeling is lack of control. I was stuck. I couldn't get out. As adults, we can have a conversation. As a child, especially, the earlier, the worse the trauma becomes, because we're not verbal. So we feel and we absorb everything. And so I think it is important to understand, okay, wait, first of all, was there something overwhelming in my childhood where I felt like I didn't have control? Okay, what was that about? And then secondly, right, am I seeking from my partner to heal my mom wound, to heal my dad wound, to be the mom that I didn't have? Right, because we do that all the time. I see this literally every day in my practice. I would say with most, if not all of my couples. We bring that into the relationship, wanting our partner to become that parent that we didn't have.
So interesting. And it's kind of interesting because from the woman's perspective, right? You never want to be the guy's mom.
No.
And it's like, that's the type of conversation you have with like your homegirls, and you're like, oh my God, I feel like I'm his mom. I'm always reminding him to take care of this, and I'm always on top of things, and I'm the person that's in charge, and I'm the one that makes sure that the bills get paid, or whatever the case may be. And then that makes the woman feel like I'm not having the masculine support that I'm seeking in my partner. And that takes away the sexy from the relationship. So it's like, it's so interesting that sometimes as a woman, you know that you have to play the supportive role and you have to help him in the ways that he's weak in, right? That's partnership. But then I feel like it's a fine line between that and like becoming the guy's mom, you know?
Yes, and ladies out there, if you have noticed, because anytime we have that parent-child relationship or the dynamic that seemingly is like that, sex will suffer. Sex will suffer almost immediately, right? And I think as women, we also have to be able to let go. But you and I were talking about this earlier, Dee, since especially as a Latina woman, right, you hear things like, ay, mommy, he's getting a little, Well, are you giving him enough vegetables? Why is it my job to make sure that he eats vegetables? But we have been conditioned in some ways that it is the woman's role to keep the relationship together.
Right.
So it always takes you going back a little bit like, how did I get this message? And listen, if he's not eating his vegetables, I gotta let go. So it's also looking into how much control we want to have and being able to let go and let be, right? Because, and talking a little bit about trauma or attachment injuries, if I grew up in a household where I wasn't needed or wanted and now you need me, oh, I'm going to jump into that role happily, right? Because I've never felt this feeling from anyone and you need me to help. Oh, perfect. So we also want to be aware what is playing out, because this is where those things, those dynamics solidify. And then that parent-child, it really starts to challenge the sexual relationship.
Is it very common in your practice for you to come across married couples who haven't had sex 6+ months?
Yes.
Really? That's
Yes.
common.
Longest, guys, okay, let's do a little quiz. Longest, what do you think the longest, and I've had more than one couple with this presentation, longest time that they haven't been sexual with each other?
Living together, I would say a year.
I would say a year too.
7.
7
Living
Eight,
together?
7 and 8, living together.
Were they having sex
married.
with other people?
No. Well, eventually what dragged, some of my couples into therapy was stepping out of the relationship. That brought him in. One person just wanting a divorce, that brought him in. And it's interesting because when I have this presentation, the person says, well, how could you not tell me that this was such an important thing? And what I turn to say to that person, when did you start to turn that part of you off?
Right.
When do you say to yourself, my sexuality is not important? Because the way that I work with couples is individual work in the context of a relationship, individual change, individual, understanding yourself causes relationship change, right? So isn't that 7 to 8 years, guys?
Wow.
For some of us, that's like, no, imagínate.
No, and I'm not trying to act like sex is everything. Of course not. As you mature and you get older in certain partnerships, you understand that that's not everything. But it's just because it's such a foreign experience, I find it like, how did you guys do that? Like, how did you live together for 7 years? Were you sleeping in separate bedrooms? Like, now I'm starting to get super inquisitive. I want to ask a bunch of questions. Like, how do you get to that point where you learn how to suppress that desire?
Yeah, and what I see a lot of the time is that, one, nobody talks about sex openly. We don't really grow up with a lot of sex education. So when this topic comes up, what I've noticed a lot of my couples do, I always use this analogy, it's kind of like the cabinet. When are you going to fix it? Well, I told you to fix it last week, but why don't you fix it? So it becomes a topic that in the beginning there's anger, there's resentment, but then there's sadness, grief, and eventually hopelessness. So we stop talking about it because when we talk about it, it is so hurtful to our relationship and we don't know how to fix it that I'd rather put it aside. I want to scream in the top of the mountains that it is important, guys, that if you notice, unless there's a big transition going on, unless you just had a baby, unless you just made a big move, unless, there's a lot of things that get in the way. But if you haven't connected with your partner for 6 months, right, and there hasn't been, you just got married, if there hasn't been something big that takes a lot of your time, it is a time to seek the help of a sex therapist. That is the saddest part of my job, that when people come in and they've been married for 25 years, and I ask them, when was your first resentment? And they take me all the way back to year 2. Wow. I'm like, this is going to take a lot of work. And people have to be willing to put in the work in order to be able to come out on the other side, right? Otherwise, either they stay together unhappily or eventually it will lead to separation or divorce or infidelity, right? Infidelity is a way. People look at infidelity in many different ways, but really, and this is the work of Esther Perel, she says, a lot of the times it's not finding another person. And that's true. Many of my people that I've worked with infidelity, it's not like they're thinking, I'm going to cheat on this person. I'm going to, it wasn't thought of, but all of a sudden they feel seen by Luisa at the office. And Luisa says, oh my God, you look so good. And I like your suit and, cool tattoos. Right? And all of a sudden I feel seen by someone, and this feeling I haven't felt for so long that it is more about the feeling that we're curious about. It is not about finding another, but it's about finding and discovering that part of yourself that you've lost in the relationship that you're in.
Yeah. I can see that. And I want to talk about cheating.
Okay.
I think that that's such a big subject because it breaks some relationships, but now a lot of people are getting really into the swing of things of being in a more open relationship, and the dynamic of the rules of their relationship is a little different. So when that happens, when a person is in a partnership with someone and they believe that they just want to have, let's say, sexual encounters with other people, but it's not that they want to lose the partnership with their person. Does that mean that there's a weakness within that relationship? Or is it that, are you just putting a Band-Aid on something that's inevitably going to just end? You know what I mean? Like, or is it just that we're so modern nowadays that we've been able to figure this out,
Yeah, so fun fact, through the pandemic, we saw people start to be more interested in open relationships. I think whenever psychologically we go through a big crisis where we're facing mortality, when we say, is this it? And if this is it, am I living a life worth living? So a lot of people started to toy with this idea of what would be like to have an open relationship with you. But I think, open relationships can be really hard. I would say that first you gotta up it on the communication and what is the intention? What is the purpose? Because I've seen presentations where or we open the relationship, or I don't know if I want to be with you. And when the person agrees, not because they want to, but out of fear, whenever you agree to something out of fear, we're starting with the wrong foot, right? That presentation can be really damaging because many times we end up traumatizing the relationship. Sometimes it is, and the presentation is, you're too sexual for me, you want too much, sure, go out of the relationship. And that's not great as well. I think it's important to understand, okay, are we in it? And what are some boundaries that we want to have? Are there certain sexual things that is just you and me, right? Like oral sex. I only want you to do that with me. You can go out and have sex with other people, but this particular thing, passionate kissing, is there things that I just want us to keep between you and I? How much do we share about the other experiences that we've had with other people? Do you want to hear about my stuff? Can you support me if I'm having something happen with another partner? So those are just tiny bits of information, guys, that we have to be willing to negotiate. Can I veto if I just feel icky about this person that you want to have sex with? And are you not going to give me crap about it? Right? So there's a lot of little layers that we have to visit. But first and foremost, are we both wanting this? It's totally normal that one person is going to want it more than the other, right? And both parties have to work on being patient and letting the other person catch up. But if you're doing it out of fear, if you're doing it because you're afraid that you're going to lose the person, or just to quick Band-Aid solution because I can't meet your needs, therefore go meet it elsewhere, that's not a good start. And usually what I see is not a good ending to that story.
Always the case, right? I'm kind of hesitant, but very curious in asking.
Sure.
What's your thoughts regarding the whole Jada Pinkett Smith, Will Smith scenario? Like what happened and their story, the red table talk, and the admissions to infidelity. And, a lot of people accuse one side of being narcissistic, controlling, constantly comparing, to an ex or whatever. Do you have any personal opinions on that based on your history?
Cesar, so I'm not super savvy with everything that's going on in the world because I got to keep my mind very focused.
Yeah.
But
We can recap it. And,
recap it. Talk
She, Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith, apparently have an open marriage.
Okay.
And the reason we found that out officially is because a guy that she was involved with, which was much younger than she was, is an R&B singer. His name is August Alsina. He, I guess, went on a rant and declared his love for her and kind of exposed his wounds of how hurt he was from that breakup. Like he was very much in love with her. And that exposed a part of their intimate relationship that was very embarrassing for Will Smith. So then it concluded in eventually them having to talk about it in public on her platform. And he looked distraught. He was crying. It was a rough thing to see a man of his stature experience. but they made it seem like that was kind of their norm, and it seemed like that was their understanding, and he as well, right, can do the same.
And guys, who
Yeah.
was calling who a narcissist and controlling?
No, I mean the general consensus
Ay, Dios mío.
is that Jada is the narcissist.
Yes, and this is the label thing that I'm talking about, Caesar and D, that so much, we use so many labels but I think, you know, we judge what we don't understand. We judge what we fear, right? And it does happen in open relationships that people fall in love, right? Because imagine you get to go to this, you get to travel, you get in your little canoe, you have your land, but you go to travel to an exotic island. In this exotic island, I get to experience the best of you, you get to experience the best of me. So it does happen that sometimes people do fall in love, right? It sounds like this guy fell in love with her, put her business out there. But as the public, I think we're really quick to judge, right? And we're really quick to say, well, this person is this person is that. I'm not sure if that's true, right? But I think, when a couple has decided that this works for them, the decision itself comes with a lot of continuous check-ins because life is uncertain. And even though we have all these agreements about who's going to do what and how much we're going to talk about this, there are things that are going to happen, just like this situation, that are uncertain. And we have to be willing to accept that that comes with the territory. What I am following, I don't know if you guys watch this, but Vanderpump Rules.
No.
Oh my God. So this is also, see, we follow. But this is one thing that I'm like, because, infidelity ended up happening there. And I see how quick people are to judge the person that walked out of the relationship and how angry the partner is that you didn't tell me that this was happening. And for my people out there that have been through infidelity, if you're ready to seek help, because I've seen this presentation when a couple comes in, but one person is so angry. And they literally try to pull me in and say, isn't he a monster? Isn't she, horrible for doing this to me and my family? And they sit there just like jamming, anger. You're not ready. Or you need to do a little bit of extra work to really be, okay, do I really want to work on this? And what is this stirring up in me that I know that you betrayed me in this way? So infidelity is a really interesting topic. Because I think we live it, we see it in the media, all of us have been in relationships where probably that has happened to us as well, and so I think it's important for us to understand how layered it really is.
There's different types of infidelity, right? Like, is there like a certain type of infidelity that you see people generally recovering from?
So, because I wanna talk on what you're saying. So it's interesting. For men, they say this, and I don't mean to generalize, but just the people that I've worked with. Men say, I'd rather you have sex with someone than be emotionally involved with someone. Women, right, I'd rather you, well, actually it's kind of both, right? Like, so when we talk about types of infidelity, emotional, physical, even financial, right? Like, let's say we were talking about strip clubs earlier. You go to the 11, we know it's not cheap, and you spend a whole bunch of money, but then you and I are having financial issues. So I see all types of infidelity and thinking about it, actually emotional and physical. They're hurtful depending really on the human, not so much the gender. But people do recover, but both of them have to be willing. And one thing that's really important for the person that stepped out, because one of the things that I often ask, okay, this happened, but how did you come home knowing that you just saw and had sex with someone else? What was it like to say hi to your kids? How do you compartmentalize that, right? And what's funny about infidelity, guys, that a lot of the time what I see, it's super random. Like the person, these are couples that never check each other's phone. Oh, we were going to the park. I picked up for the GPS. A message came up. Hey, baby, how are you? Really, it comes to you. We think that we have transparency and I need to know everything about you. That's surveillance. And that starts to actually affect the trust in the relationship. We have to be able to feel free, right? And so, this is Esther Perel's quote, real trust is being okay with a constant engagement of the unknown, right? So people do recover. but you really have to want it, and do not wait, right? Like, people wait too long, or people say survivors. These are the survivors. Okay, we have a family, we've been together too long, don't do it again. Okay, I won't do it again. Keep on going.
Right.
A year later, a year and a half, 2 years, 5 years, same similar dynamics, because that person never really did the work to understand what made me step out, right? And if there's anything there, and how did I contribute? So I think that there is recovery, but it does take, work and intention.
So is it true, once a cheater, always a cheater?
No, I don't. I honestly don't think that's true, because a lot of the people that I've worked with that have stepped out of the relationship, again, they weren't looking for it. It was that feeling. It was that, and people can say, and there is so much to learn, right? Like, because it's not only why did I step out, but what was it that I couldn't manage, right? A lot of the times, people are afraid of commitment. So in order for me to feel free, like I can still validate myself, I'm gonna go out and seek that elsewhere. Well, if this is about validation, so let's work on that, right? And let's think a little bit about how can, and then it's like weeds, right? Like when we're trying to pull out the weeds of the garden, those things have such a long root. And I'm a new, gardener, not really gardener, but I'm trying to.
Yeah.
But I take out the weeds and I'm like, holy crap, I'm like, there, take out the weeds. Has such a long root. So people have to understand that behavior is what we see on top, but there's always a lengthy explanation. And if the other person says, oh, you're just making excuses, then that's not gonna work, right? Because usually people cheat, but there's a bigger explanation. Don't get me wrong, there are people that, they are non-monogamous. They want to convince themselves that they are, because the traditional relationship, because this is how I grew up, but they're non-monogamous. They can't keep it in the pants, both, all genders, but then not willing to have a non-monogamous relationship because that's not what I want. Bueno, pero then what is it that you want, right? Because then you end up hurting someone that you love.
How do you identify whether you're non-monogamous or you're just not partnered correctly?
Yeah, I think some of the things that you want to look at is, have I been able to be monogamous in my relationships? Some of the guys that I work with, they've never been monogamous, right? And there's validation stuff. There may be insecurities, confidence, not knowing how to deal with difficult or uncomfortable emotions within the relationship. So I go to, escape, distract. But I think, it's taking a little bit of a history, understanding, can this person meet all of my needs? Maybe that's not true, and challenging what you've learned about monogamy. So it takes a little bit of more digging. Every case is a little bit different. But, there's some things that you can start looking at to see if that's actually the case.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've cheated before and I plan never to do it again. And I think that the reason I did it was to not feel lonely. And you shouldn't feel lonely in your relationship. That was the lesson that I learned. So it's kind of one of those things that sometimes you have to have those hard experiences to kind of get through that. And the reason I say that is because it resonates with me. People don't cheat because of the person that they're with. They cheat because of themselves. And I think that's really hard to accept at that moment when you're in it and everything is happening. And it's like the aftermath and the consequence of having to recover from that, I feel like is something that I would never want selfishly to go through again. Like, it's just too much.
No, Diana, yes, I'm with you, and I've been in those experiences as well. And it's like having these two lives, or having these two, it's too much. People assume, oh, well, you stepped out of the relationship. Well, you want your cake and eat it too. No, it's just sometimes as draining, as hard for the person that has stepped out. And when you talk about loneliness in relationships can actually be very subtle, because you can have the person next to you, but emotionally you feel that there is no connection.
Right.
So I think, we were talking earlier, guys, that we live in such a fast-paced world that when we're talking about these techniques, pause, understand, why am I feeling lonely? What is this about? It takes the one thing that we're so bad at, which is mindfulness, going in, slowing down, career, money, finances, status, family, marriage, When do we get to pause and really say, what is this bringing up for me? So thank you for that, sharing that and the vulnerability of that, because I think people need to understand that the person that steps out suffers, I don't want to say just as much, but also suffers.
Because I mean, genuinely, if we're gonna look at people, I think people don't necessarily intend to hurt others. Like, it's not like you're forefront with a person that you're sharing your life with or that you love. You would rather not hurt them in general. So I think that when a person does those type of actions, it's like, we need to understand a bit more about why this is happening. You know what I mean? So it's like, not to excuse the behavior, you have to pay the consequence for what you do. Some people are not going to tolerate that, and that's perfectly fine. But I think that it's bigger than that.
Yes,
sometimes.
and we have to be able to have these conversations, because people, if somebody says, well, listen, the partner that steps out hurts, so also, are you saying that you're okay with infidelity? Nope, it's not what I said. Because we're so afraid. Black and white thinking is a way in which we protect ourselves. If humans could put a red dot on everybody that's bad, somehow we would feel safer, right? And the news, the media, is constantly giving us that message. And that is just not true, So I think black and white thinking, we see a lot of people in trauma that it's like this or like this, because that somehow keeps me safe, but it's actually creating another bigger, sometimes, issue.
Sometimes.
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 Are you a black and white thinker, Cesar?
Well, and gray in between.
Okay.
But I like to think that it's important to know your walking away point.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Right? When am I trying to make it work? And when you talk a little bit about walking away point, like relationship, knowing when to let go. And a good question for that, right, is what am I willing to live with? Right? Because to your point, Diana, when you were talking earlier and you were saying, okay, what if this person, really needs help, but they don't want to look at their stuff? Am I willing to live with someone that emotionally can give me what I need? And I'm not saying maybe the person is not going to communicate as us. And of course, that expectation is setting yourself up for failure. But can I live with someone that is not willing to look deeper? Because vulnerability is at the foundation of connection. When we can really, when that person says, man, this is what I'm feeling. And for those of you who have a hard time being vulnerable, start with just talking about your experience. My body's feeling something weird. I'm feeling a little bit scared. I want to say something to you, but I've never talked about this. Start with literally, what am I experiencing? That is the first step, right? But what am I willing to live with? And if this is just something that I'm not, give yourself permission to walk away. I think sometimes we hold on to relationships a little bit too long. Again, thinking that that person can become the parent that I didn't have, thinking that I could do something to change it. We can't. We try, but we can't.
Yeah.
So, in your history as a sex therapist, how often have you prescribed alternative forms of sexual experimentation? And, like, hey, explore a kink, maybe try doing it outside and see if that spices up the marriage or whatever,
Sure.
Is that often a prescription that you do, or?
Yes, a lot of the time, because Cesar, one of the couples that come to me a lot is couples that have been married for a really long time, had kids, careers, home, one of them or all of the above, and they're like, man, our sex life, it's just routine. We don't really want it. So I wholeheartedly believe in sensory play. And kink has this parts of it that, when they talk about kink, guys, because unfortunately, unfortunately, 50 Shades of Grey introduced this, there was a sex therapist that he was doing research on this movie. So he went to the movie like over 30 times, looking at who comes to the movie, a group of women, mostly women. In what parts of the movie do they giggle, right? Like, when are people like, wow, right? Like, so there's something about, for women, take away that responsibility, right? And so I love this idea of kink because, first of all, it's very consensual. There's negotiation, and I like for my people to start with the basics, blindfolds, I find myself prescribing blindfolds pretty often because it heightens the sensations. And of course, we talk about what is it like for you to wear blindfolds, because some people may be a little bit afraid, if they have fear of losing control. But, guys, in order for us to experience an orgasm, literally that is where we have to let go of all control, right? So I'm always looking for creative ways. I usually start with my couples that haven't been sexual or that routine is really getting in the way of being sexual. I get them talking about it first. So I give them this exercise called Curious Minds, where they talk about what senses do you enjoy? Where does your body want to be touched? What are parts of your body that need a little bit more attention? Right? Like, what is it like for you to ask me about likes and dislikes? Do you feel comfortable asking for things that you want or saying no to things that you don't? Because it is a myth that women are less sexual than men.
Yeah, 100%.
Let me repeat that.
Yeah.
It is a myth that women are less sexual than men, but a lot of times for the women is they're not having sex worth wanting. If you show up...
That's a fact.
Fact.
Yeah.
If you show up with an erection, and erect penises can be beautiful. In porn, awesome. Because we jump right in it. But if you show up with an erect penis and you haven't done anything outside of the bedroom or inside of the bedroom to get me to that place to invite me, then I'm probably going to say no thanks. Many women come to me with low libido or lack of sex drive, and they've gone to a doctor, and it's more about sex worth wanting. The attention that you get outside of the bedroom, if you never opened the door for her, but today you're opening the door, you came home and the house was clean, and you're like, oh man, you really get me, you really appreciate me, you understand me. And that in itself increases the possibility that something else is gonna happen. Mood enhancers, put on a little bit of music, candles, smells, oils, right? Like, there's all these ways that you can play with dominance and submission and likes and dislikes that can get you awakened. So yes, I find myself prescribing types of kink all the time.
So when you say blindfolds, it's like, the person being submissive.
So I start with, okay, we're gonna give each other a massage. But in this massage, you're not focusing too much on giving pleasure, but be curious with your fingertips, right? And I'm borrowing little parts of a technique called Sensei Focus. It was created by Masters and Johnsons. But some couples don't need the whole technique, but this is just borrowing from. So we're going to be curious with our fingertips. We're going to go through the whole body, but we're going to leave genitals off. So you're going to go around the vulva. You're going to go around the nipples, but you're not going to go in anywhere. And the person is wearing blindfolds, and they're just, what does it feel like to be touched? If there's a touch that feels comfortable, we're going to use handwriting. So you're going to put the hand on top of them, and you're going to put it elsewhere. And then we take turns, right? So it's a way, no penetration allowed. It's interesting when you take penetrative sex off the table, what else can we explore? We've all watched girl-on-girl sex. They don't have a penis and they're having a blast, right? So it's a way to really, I believe in sensuality, and women are so sensual. Women are so sensual. So it's one of the ways in which we get the senses up, and when you put blindfolds, that's automatically what happens, right? And for women, one of our main barriers is their inability to be in the present moment, especially if you're a mom, planning, right? Like, so those type of settings, that type of context is gonna help you be in the moment, and desire and arousal will come after.
And what I love about what you're saying is taking your time. I think that's the most beautiful thing that you just described, because that sounds like something that takes time, right? And it should be, because I've been in a long-term relationship, you don't dedicate time like that once you've been together for so long. And that's why it's not surprising that a married couple may say, we've been together for 20 years and we've been lacking in that, and it's very routine. Because it even happens in lower numbered relationships. It's like you don't really prioritize at wooing the person quite as much. And I think that's such a beautiful takeaway that I think I might use that one day, because I think that's so awesome what you just described. No, honestly, it sounds amazing, because it's like a slow process to kind of reconnect, and I think that's beautiful. And I'm really interested in this kink conversation, because it's like, how does one learn about kinks? Because it's like, if you wasn't raised that way, if if you don't participate and hang out with people that are into like openly speaking about sex, and if you're not like going to like a sex shop, like how does a person know?
Yes. Okay.
What's out there?
And I want to say something about what you said, because you talked about time, and it's interesting. I love that you brought that up, because in this little Curious Mind exercise, in the blindfold, where my couple struggle the most is to make time. Sometimes we have to talk. They come back. They're like, "We didn't do it," and I'm like, "It's okay, guys. This is home practice. This is not homework. This is practicing at home while you're learning in my sessions." So I'm like, why didn't you do your homework? No, no, no. But what got in the way? And we spend sometimes 2 or 3 sessions trying to figure out what are the things, what are the barriers that we have to take away in order for you to be able to open this space. And it's also a myth. You talked about older couples and younger couples. Guys, our younger generation, they are growing up with even more stuff to take them out of the moment. So I see a lot of younger couples, and what's interesting, if you fall into a no sex or a lack of sex relationship in the first 2 years of marriage, it becomes the #1 reason for divorce. So earlier relationships, younger couples, if this is a thing, you got to start looking into it now. We have a myth, oh, Paula, maybe you see a lot of older couples. Nope, I don't. So when it comes to kink, so guys, we have so much information out there. First, not being afraid of the word kink. Right? Like when I talk about BDSM and kink, people are like, give me a look. I'm like, listen, guys, I'm not talking about, puppy play or like leather and chains, right? So first, understanding what that means.
Because that sounds intimidating.
Yes, absolutely 100%. That's why I
like
always...
you envision a dungeon. It's like, whoa. Like I'm not sure if I'm there. Yeah,
Exactly. And not being afraid, guys. So for example, here in Miami, we have 2 big events coming up, Sex on the Beach, which is going to be in the World Erotic Art Museum, and learning, for me, just to self-disclose a little bit, one of the first times that I'm like, oh, this is interesting, it was in Exotica. Exotica has been in Miami. I think this is going to be their 3rd year, but it's a lot of, they have dungeons, they have vlogging. I wish I would have brought some show and tell. I will for the next time.
I love it.
And then, people think, oh my God, I don't want to feel pain. No, it's not pain. It's intense sensation. And flogging is like, like leather, and it kind of goes like this, and it has little like fringes. And, so I would say, let your curiosity go. Don't say no to something without trying it. I love to use the traffic light exercise. Is this a green for you? Is this like yellow for you? Or is this a red? What you see in movies, ooh, that's interesting. But then this takes me to, if you grew up in a very religious household, if you grew up good, bad, right? Then you're going to say your brakes are going to come on even before you're talking about kink. And it happens to me all the time in sessions. So I think, guys, exploring a little bit, looking, now we have Instagram. So looking for sex educators, sex therapists, that help you understanding. I always like to go deep. I never go on the surface. And trying out things, at Sex on the Beach, I'm going to be presenting, I'm going to be introducing some of this, but in a very light way, and understanding what's behind that. Because routine and monotony kill desire.
Right.
So a little bit of novelty and newness. Oh, I didn't even know I liked that. So not being afraid to try certain things. On Exotica, the first night is free for ladies, right? So you get to go and try different things. See, just looking at it, oh, that person is being flogged. What is that like? I wonder how that feels. Oh, this person is being, they were doing a little bit of rope. Oh, what is that like? Right? Because remember, you guys, in the kink world, you always have a safe word. You can always say, and for the people that try this, if they go a little bit more advanced, you can always say pineapple, which means not liking what's happening, right? Aguacate, limon. I don't know why I always go with fruit, right? But that's where I go. Aguacate is a big one. Flan is mine. Right? Like where we can say, because I love flan. I'm always, and I use reset words even, when we're getting into arguments. So if we're getting into arguments and we're escalating, flan, which means let it go, we both have to let it go. Right? So, but I wholeheartedly believe that newness and novelty, whatever that means. Having sex outside the bedroom. What does your bedroom look like? If it looks like a hot mess, or if the kids' toys are everywhere, is that enticing to you?
That's not sexy. You have to be intentional and keep it sexy.
And
Yeah.
even going out on dates, guys, that's part of novelty. Because if I see you in sweatpants and a t-shirt every day, especially now that we're working from home, right? Like we look really good up here, but under here we have the shorts.
Yeah.
Going out on a date because it feels good to feel good, so I get dressed up. If you don't desire yourself, it's going to be really hard for your partner to desire you. So just going on a date, going to a walk on the park, leaving your phones aside, not taking your phones with you, it makes us reconnect with one another. So when it comes to novelty, kink is one, but guys, there's so many other ways to be creative around that topic.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
No, just basically creating intentional space for each other. What about, kink is, there's many kinks, right? Are all the kinks that you generally prescribe, are all of them based on power dynamics?
Not necessarily, because sometimes people don't even know if they like to be dominant or submissive, or they can do both, right? Like sometimes people, and I actually refrain, or sometimes I don't use, especially with a couple that, they're just starting to kind of understand this, I don't use dominant and submissive, right? Like I ask other questions to help them understand, well, do you like this? Do you like that? What is this like? So I think, because people come into the office not even knowing if they are dominant or submissive, right? But it's more about what haven't you done and what are you interested in, right? And what would it be like to do something a little bit different? So not necessarily, because people may not know if they are one or the other, or both. People can be both.
Okay. So it's more like, exploratory sessions first.
Yes, always, absolutely. Always, absolutely.
Okay. It's funny because for me, my personal kink is, I guess you would call it being an exhibitionist.
Okay.
But not necessarily like wanting people to look at me, more like fear of getting caught kind of thing.
Okay.
And that just kind of happened naturally or whatever. And when you think about like, dominant, submissive, you automatically think of like leather and chains and the mask, the dungeon.
The ball gag.
Like, oh shit.
Exactly.
Pulp Fiction.
Oh, Pulp Fiction. The ball.
So scared. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. We all know what that's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is, if you don't mind me asking, what is it about being, liking exhibitions or being an exhibition? What is it about that turns you on or presses on your accelerators? What is it about that you enjoy?
I don't know. I guess it's just exciting, like being outside and the taboo-ness of like, ooh, let's make love right here. It's just a thrilling in itself.
Yeah. And I think, and there's something really freeing, guys, about just being naked or even having sex, in the, and if you think about it too, like the outdoors, there's so much senses, right? But I think I ask because I think it's important for people to know, guys, and the three of us were talking about this earlier, know what you like and be okay with what you like, right? Like, don't be afraid of that, right? And if you have a partner that's willing to play, why not?
But that's key, right? Like your partner needs to, like you can't have a partner who's not willing to play with the same king. That's like a cause for divorce.
Yes, well, I would say, Cesar, willing to understand. Because before we can play, right? Like, because again, going back to what we were talking about, chains and leather, I said, well, I'm a kinky person, and that person has never heard that. It's like, oh, I'm scared. What does that mean? Wait, well, what is it about, just like that question that I asked you, what is it about that you enjoy? Right, like, what is it? Because sometimes when we think exhibitionist, right, like, we think, what was that? Sábado Gigante, maybe, or some, where the guy with the black coat is like, and then the women,
That's super inappropriate. Now that you think about it, right? Like, that was crazy.
Wow.
He was a flasher.
y las mujeres,
Wow.
right?
Okay.
And people are like, oh, Sábado Gigante, I'm out. No. El chacal, y fuera, right?
Yeah.
No. What is it about that you enjoy?
Right.
right? Like, and okay, let's try it out because, people, this pain thing, I don't want to inflict pain on you and I don't want to intensify sensation, right? So I think with kinks is before like not willing to play, well, are you willing to understand? And if you have, I think the three of us guys can it be fair to say that we couldn't really be with a partner that's very, very judgmental. I know for me, when it comes to my friends, the people that I surround myself with, my partner, I can't be with someone who's judgmental, and I'm biased, of course, because I work so hard to leave all of that out of the room when I see my clients. And so if you have somebody that's like, eres un enfermo, you're sick, like, what is wrong with you? That's gonna shame shows up, right? And that's gonna cause distance. Shame says, I am too broken to connect with you. And that will lead you to separation or divorce.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I gathered from what Caesar's asking and what I can understand as well is like, what if you and your partner are just not on the same sexual level for whatever reason, right? Like that person is just like, they're just not into what you're into and you want to be more explorative and you want to, try going to things that are a little bit outside the box. Like one of the subjects that's really popular, especially here in Miami, and we talked about this like in our own social circles, is people going to sex clubs. And like that being something that a lot of people are willing to just explore and just see what it feels like or just be in that environment. And then maybe being in a partnership with someone that person is really against that for whatever reasons, right? Like how do you appropriately deal with that without hindering the union?
Yeah, well, I think we have a new one, guys, called Crave. We were kind of going back and forth with them because I think it's super important to understand that when we're having these spaces for play, that consent has to be part of the conversation. But I think when those presentations happen, I would say a couple of things, right? Like not being afraid of differences, guys. We are not gonna like the same things. That expectation is silly to even think about. But okay, first understanding, why do you like this? Why do I like this? And if this is something that I really want, am I okay with you venturing out with certain boundaries? Like, can I go to a sex club, understanding that I'm not going to be sexual with anyone, but I do need to feed my curiosity, right? Am I okay with you venturing in this way, knowing that you're going to keep our relationship intact? And if the thing is no way, no, then am I willing to live with someone that doesn't allow me to go play and explore my sexual desires in this way? That's the question that the other person has to ask.
Yeah.
So, do you does this often work with couples?
You mean like understanding their differences?
No, I mean like, they try the blindfold exercise, they try the kinks and stuff. Is this something that you generally see like, oh, you guys look closer?
Well, yes. I think, it makes them discover something. Something, because we're so outcome driven, right? Like a lot of the times, even with my couple, okay, but is that gonna work? But what is that gonna do? But how do I, the most popular question, how do I, okay, there's anything that's important takes time. Anything that's important takes time. So I think it does work in the sense that they always come back learning something. Oh, actually, I didn't really know I liked to be blindfolded, but I could notice that it actually, what I hear a lot is that it helped me, it heightened other senses, and I was able to focus on what was happening a lot more. Music is another one. Except for my people with ADD, sometimes they're like, Paul, I started singing the lyrics of the music. I'm like, okay, we need instrumental or no music? Right? So it's really important to understand. And even though social media does a good job at giving us a lot of information, it sucks because sometimes people read something, okay, if I do 1, 2, 3, then I'm going to be trauma free. If I do 1, 2, 3, I'm going to have better sex with my partner. And they go and do it and it doesn't work because it's so tailored, right? And being okay that you're going to try something and maybe you're learning something from that. Some people are afraid, oh no, the blindfolds, but then I have no control. Okay, let's try something else, right? So I think, yes, every time I suggest for people to do this, we realize or discover something. It is a journey of discovery.
And one other thing that you said, that most of the couples that you see are actually younger couples. And you said that if they've been together for the first 2 years after marriage or whatever, and there's like periods of no sex, that usually leads to divorce. Like, how long does that period have to be? Like a month, 2 months? Like,
Yeah, guys, I would say.
I mean,
Just asking for a friend.
I love this. Guys, now that I'm thinking about it, is it 2 years or 5 years? I don't want to mislead people or give the wrong information. I'll get back to you on that, sister. But it's either 2 years or 5 years. It becomes the number one issue. I would say it's 6 months. If by this 6 months and you notice, and again, nothing big has happened, it's time to look at it. What's going on? Because I think that dynamic can become really hard, right? Like the person that's not having sex, guys. Sex is, I would say, it's part of communicating with your partner, but it's communicating with your body. It's communicating with your senses. When you take sex off the relationship, it's like a playground, but you have this beautiful playground in your neighborhood, but you never go there. You go to you go to all the other places, but you stop playing. And there's something about that childlike behavior that you bring into relationships that is like, right? Like, so yeah, I mean, a month, I don't think is a really long time, just because so many things can get in the way. And I would also ask, how does that person define sex? Because are you guys having oral sex? Are you doing mutual masturbation? Does the other person get you off? If penetrative sex is not happening for some reason, for me, when I talk about sex, guys, I talk about all of the above, right? So I also wonder, how are we talking about it? Because if it's been a month, but you're saying like, hey, babe, I know we haven't sexually connected. I have a lot on my mind. It's on my mind. I want to know that it's important to me too, right? Like, I know that this isn't the relationship, but just give me some time. Awesome. Babe, I'm realizing that we haven't connected. What do you think if we talk to somebody? Babe, can we watch this TED Talk that I saw that kind of talks to what we're experiencing in the relationship? We want to know that, hey, do you still think about it? Because I think about it all the time. So just for you to let me know that you're thinking about it too, great.
okay. So, with these couples, right? You often find that like maybe they just say, you know what, we just don't want to do this stuff, and maybe explore our own way. Like they just want to reject your notion, but they still like find their success being together.
You mean like being in a...
Like we don't wanna try these things out. We're gonna do our own thing to explore, to explore, and yet they stay together. Like,
Yeah, I don't get that a lot, Cesar, because, before I go there, I've done a whole individual history, which one of them. I've already made a lot of connections about their childhood, and we all have the wounded child, the adaptive child, and the wise adult. We've already created so many bridges, so I don't get that a lot. I do, though, always tell my couples, like, guys, we're gonna try this, but if there's anything that I'm saying that you're like, ooh, or something that didn't work, that's okay, tell me. But I don't get a lot of people that are like, no, we're gonna try this, we're gonna try it our own way, and then I don't get that presentation too often, I would say. People do drop out of treatment for many different reasons, and unfortunately, I don't know what the end of the story is for those couples. But I don't get that very often because, again, before prescribing these little creative ways of connection and novelty, we've already gone through. In my work, people come to me for sex therapy often, but I'm very honest since the beginning. I am not gonna work with you unless you are willing to do inner child work. Like, I don't really work with, no, but I want to work in the present, the here and the now. Sure, I understand, but then I'm not a good fit. Because I wholeheartedly believe before we can understand the how, we have to understand the why. And if a person says, well, I'm not willing to try that, all right, let's explore the why, right? Because there may be something there that's blocking them. Sometimes with sex, people say, but if I try this one thing, are you going to want more of it? If we go to the sex club one time, are you going to want to go every weekend? And just that fear presses on the brakes or even trying it for the first time. And we got to talk about that.
Do you think it's wrong for them to ask those questions? Or not wrong, but more like it kind of... Because those fears that they have need to be addressed.
Of
right?
course, no. There's no, like what I tell my couples often, it is not what you're asking, it's what you're not saying that I'm concerned about. You can ask me anything, right? Like, and I'm pretty open with them. You know, sometimes I curse in my sessions, sometimes I bring in a lot of humor because it is a topic that needs a little bit like, hey, I'm human too, it's all right, I'm not an authority. We're a little team now. We're working together. So I encourage people to ask difficult questions, to challenge me now. There's been presentations, not too many, where I become the target because they don't know how to speak to one another. And you got to trust your therapist. If you don't trust your therapist, if you think, oh, they listen to you because they want to make money. If you don't trust in that I'm here because, not only because I care, and yes, I do have to make a living, of course, right? But if you don't trust your therapist, then that's going to be a little bit challenging. But no, I always tell them it's not what you ask, it's what you don't. That's what worries me. But I welcome all types of uncomfortable questions. I'm here for it.
Okay. So I guess lastly, is how we like to close out the show.
Okay.
So if you had any romantic advice that you would tell your younger self, what would it be?
Find a therapist when you were in your 20s. I would say find a therapist when you were in your 20s. Because I don't know if I could have challenged all that I brought, all that I've lived on my own. I think it's really hard, guys. And, yes, I'm a little biased, but I almost feel like we all need a space. We all need a space to talk. We all need a space we need somebody else to accompany us in this really hard thing called life. It is hard being a human, right? So my younger self, I would say find a therapist early on. Because there was a lot of, growing up in Colombia, machista culture, a Colombian woman, all these messages that I see them so clear now play out in my relationships, right? That if I had somebody to guide me, I think that, I would have had an easier time, but, you live and you learn.
Well, that's fascinating.
I love it.
Yeah, I love it.
I love it.
You know?
And I want everybody to go to Sex on the Beach. When is
Yes,
this?
guys.
Yes.
So this is Sex on the Beach. It's happening at the World Erotic Art Museum, July 8th. And guys, I post a lot of things. I'm also creating groups because, guys, what I've noticed is some people don't need individual therapy weekly, and some people can't afford individual therapy weekly. So what I'm working on is doing groups so we can have this type of conversations. You can still get the help. And, it doesn't have to be weekly and you can afford it, so I'm always looking for ways, how can I do this work with more people? So I post all of that in Sessions with Paola, SEXXIONS with Paola. I also have a YouTube channel where I'm educating, and there's some kink stuff in there where I talk about the psychology aspect of it, the physical and the emotional and the mental aspect. All of those are important.
And you said the other event was Exotica?
Exotica, yes.
When is that?
That is the weekend after. So I'm not sure if I'm gonna present yet, but I'll be there because I think that, it's cool. They have the dungeons, they have vendors, they have workshops, for people that are in the sex work field, for people that are just more intrigued about what do I like, what I don't. I think it's so important. Be curious. When you stop being curious, you stop living. When people say, oh, but we've been together for 20 years. I know everything about you. No, there's still, somebody said this I went out and asked questions in Miami, and somebody said this, and I love what he said. He said, sex is fashionable. What you liked when you were in your 20s with your partner, that changes. In your 30s, you like something different. You don't even know because you haven't tried. So sex is fashionable. So yes, guys, hopefully I get to meet you and I get to see you in this event.
I'm definitely going.
Yes.
Likewise.
I have a promo code for you. So
Yay.
yes.
Awesome. This was awesome.
Well, it was a pleasure having
Thank you, Cesar.
Yeah, of course.
I'm so excited, guys. Love it. I love having these talks. And thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Looking forward to some time in the future.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Cool.
That was